Having said that, it's my great honor to first introduce to you the President, Monsieur le Président, Tini Cox, the President of the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe, who is absolutely an ally for change. Tini, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. I explained before to Petra, I come from a big family of 10 children. And although my father and mother were not educated that much, they made it completely clear that they are fans of equal treatment of everybody. So I have 4 brothers and I have 5 sisters. So I could have been a sister and I am a brother. But overall, I feel at ease indeed. I was always surrounded by boys, by girls, by men and by women. It is so fundamental, the right that you can be safe, secure, protected, to operate free amongst other free people, that we so often forget that it's so fundamental. And especially boys and men tend to forget it, although they also want to have that fundamental right, but they tend to forget that so often for female citizens, for girls and women, they are so often feeling not safe, not secure, not protected, not really free amongst not really free people. And therefore it's so important that the Council of Europe and the Parliamentary Assembly pay attention to the role of boys and men to combat gender-based violence against women and girls. And I should like to thank the Base Parliamentary Interparliamentary Cooperation and Project Support Division in cooperation with Women at Pace, the network Women Free from Violence of the Dutch delegation, and the Dutch delegation, and especially Petra, its chairperson, to have organized this event. We recently already held a joint debate, as Petra said, in Strasbourg, where we discussed her report on the role and responsibility of men and boys in stopping gender-based violence against women. And this issue was also addressed recently in Dublin when we had a conference of ministers of justice where we adopted in Dublin the Dublin Declaration, which was endorsed by 38 member states, amongst which my government, the Dutch government, which commits inter alia to address the specific role of men and boys in preventing violence against women and to develop specific measures. I think, dear all, that we have to focus on change. Things are bad, you could say, because violence against girls and women is not a small thing, it's an enormous thing. And if you count the numbers of harassment of fundamental rights, this might be at the top of it. So if a human rights-based organization says that it wants to be taken seriously, it has to take the subject serious. But it needs change. Change will come. I'm optimistic in that way. I am already different than my parents, and my uncles and my aunts and my children are already far better than the father is, and my grandchildren, they are of course beautiful and the future. If we want to achieve change, it will not come from the sky or the good Lord. It has to be organized. That means education is pivotal in this respect. Educating our citizens, educating our children to make it clear that if someone is not free, you cannot be free. So if so many girls do not feel free, how can boys feel free? They have to realize that this should be imbalanced. Freedom for one is freedom for all, and if there is not freedom for one, there will not be freedom for all. I think we have to keep addressing the issue of sexism. I think by now we have passed the situation that when you mention sexism, people started to look at their cell phones and what is this? We realize how bad the harm done by sexism to society, and especially women and girls is. What is also important that I think that we should understand that it is not by nature that boys and men are violent. I do not believe that. It is that some boys and some men are violent, brutally violent, and they do horrible things. But most boys, most men are not violent by nature. That means that with education you can do a lot of work, and that we should also move from only, as Petra said in her introduction, move from only associating boys and men with what is called the prosecution pillar of the Istanbul Convention, but being more closely associated to what is called in the Istanbul Convention the prevention, protection and policies coordination pillars. That boys and men are not only perpetrators, but they also could be part of the, not only part of the problem, but also a great part of the solution. I think that should be the aim of this conference, how to do that, because if we can convince, educate, change men and boys that they are not longer or not in so much masses part of the problem, and that they understand that life for them is also far better, far more secure, far more safe, far more easy, far more enjoyable if they are part of the solution. Therefore, I think that combating violence against women and girls should not be considered anymore as a feminist, as a female issue. It is a human rights issue. That means that it should be approached by everybody, by the whole community, of whom men and boys should be strong and vocal. But now I end with my vocal part, and I'm going to listen to all of you in humbleness. Thank you very much, Petra.
Thank you, Monsieur le Président. Please give him a warm hand. And it is with great pleasure that I can announce the next speaker, Pascal Grotehuis, who is presently the Ambassador for Gender Equality, but will be the Director General for International Affairs. And I don't know, let's reveal a secret. I think we're sisters in crime. So please give a warm hand for Pascal, and the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. And I have to be honest, I think we actually have had a similar speech. I'm going to do it like this. Because one of my main points was also that gender equality and women's rights, it's not a women's problem. It's not a women's issue. It's a societal issue. And I travel quite a bit, and it's more outside of Europe than inside of Europe. But also inside of Europe and also inside the Netherlands, we have problems. You might know, and I think we have a few sisters in the audience and a few male allies as well in the audience. We now have a feminist foreign policy. And why do we have a feminist foreign policy? Because brothers and sisters actually work well together, but also because it's needed. And I think in development cooperation, we always had a strong emphasis on gender, because we knew that investing in gender, investing in education, in sexual education, in sexual and reproductive health and rights, it pays off. Also from an economic, not only from the human rights point of view, but also from the economic point of view. But in other spheres of the foreign policy, actually it wasn't the case. And even though we knew that if you involve women in peace negotiations or as mediators when you try to settle a war, if you don't do it, you have 70% more chance to engage in conflict sooner. Because women are really good negotiators, as some of the people in the audience know, but also because they much more look at the longer term and socio-economic aspects. And what we've seen with COVID, but also with all the other crises, is that actually we are going backwards. And then we have a regressive pushback, very well organized, well funded in the rest of the world, pushing back, also within our own borders of the European Union. So I think it was really time, actually, to step up our ambitions and to have a feminist foreign policy. And was it easy? No, because I think civil servants are quite risk-averse, and we needed male allies and a male foreign minister who actually was gutsy enough to say, let's have a feminist foreign policy. And I think he was already working on that when he was a member of the Senate, one of your predecessors for a different party, also for McKinsey, but mainly looking from the money point of view, right? Because sometimes money talks. But I think it's his strength, and then our cooperation and trade minister actually said, well, you mean the intersectional approach. I don't really think that Wopke Hoekstra knew what that meant, but at least she did. So we have an intersectional feminist foreign policy. And was it easy to get there? No. But with 2 ministers and political leadership, and you see that with all the other countries who have a feminist foreign policy as well, it's all about political leadership. I think actually him being a man, and then also, I think in some eyes you could say he's an alpha male, he has a traditional conservative background. I think it helps in our ministry to actually get it done. Because if he asks the questions and if he pushes for results, and if he asks in very tough geopolitical crises on Ukraine, on Iran, on Afghanistan, the questions, it works. And it's I think what the biggest difference is, and we're not there yet, and we're doing it in consultation, and we're drafting a handbook, and it's going to, I always say, hopefully in 10 years we have a feminist foreign policy, and we now have the ambition to get there, so it's a long process. But I think it's about, before you draft a policy, before you think about your efforts, before you think about negotiations, before you think about communication, you think what is the consequences, intended or unintended consequences, on gender equality. And I think asking that question makes our policy better and also more sustainable. And because we went public with it, I think we organized our own accountability. And I think that's also where the Council of Europe, where the parliamentarians, but also the NGOs and also other people, I always say we organize our own accountability. So we can never let this go again, because I hope that you all will hold us accountable to practice what we preach. And I think what it also did is, if you're ambitious abroad, over your own borders, you have to be believable and a trustworthy partner also on your domestic politics. So I think actually that's also one of the big gains. And I know my colleague Esther, who is here as well, she's leading from OCMW on that. But I think all the different ministries are now looking at their own policies as well. Because if you go abroad and talk about how good it is that we have gender equality at the heart of our policies, we also have some issues in the Netherlands that we have to deal with. So thank you so much. But we needed the male political leadership and male allies in the ministry and outside the ministry, besides the sisters in crime that we also needed.
Thank you very much. Thank you. And I see Rijntje van Haringen sitting over there. I'll come to you later. But we had a seminar here on feminist foreign policy. And at that event, I asked, you remember this? Yes. I asked for input on how to bring feminist foreign policy and feminist approaches also into our budget hearings. And this is on public record, so you can look it back. So my colleague, Joris Bakker, who is our spokesperson on financial affairs, he started a chapter in his speech with the Minister of Finance, who is the Vice Prime Minister from my party, Sigrid Kaag, about how to get the patriarchy out of the budget. And I can tell you, the temperature dropped a bit in the Senate. It's like, what is this question? And Joris looks like the gentleman he is, almost 70. He is quite privileged. He's completely aware of it. He's white. And then he referred, and I see Simon from the Canadian Embassy, he referred to what we can learn from other countries. Yeah. Because in Canada, you have a Gender Budgeting Accountability Act, also in the portfolio of your Vice Prime Minister and the Minister of Finance. And somehow, I know that we need to be pragmatic, and I know, but he told me I would never have been able to ask that question if you hadn't been so, he didn't say the word pushy, inspirational on feminist foreign policy. That being said, I'm going to our next speaker, Björn Berge, the Deputy Secretary General of the Council of Europe. The floor is yours. I mean, you can give him a warm hand, but maybe we should save the applause until the end. A warm hand, good.
Thank you very much, and it's great to see you all at this very important event, and thank you very much, Petra, for taking the initiative to this and organizing it. There's no doubt we need to redouble our efforts and do much more in combating violence against women, and in particular we, the men, boys, we all have to play a stronger role. And we need to learn from each other, and this is really my first point, to start also on a more positive note, because there is, as a matter of fact, a lot of important work ongoing in various countries in Europe and also beyond. There are campaigns launched, there are new legislation introduced, and there is an increased awareness of the problem. And I just want to give you three concrete examples when it comes also to the involvement of men and boys in this work. And I start with Andorra. There is a program now in Andorra targeting boys who were witnesses of victims of domestic violence. And the objective there is really to provide support to boys who may have a tendency to reproduce violent patterns of behavior to which they were then exposed or of which they were direct victims. In the United Kingdom, there is a great initiative. There is Men Against Violence. Many of you maybe know about it. They have launched a broad campaign to end violence against women, domestic abuse, sexual assault, stalking, or sexual exploitation. And the aim is to engage exactly men and boys in a positive way to end gender-based violence towards women and girls. And lastly, just another example, in Estonia, there is a number of awareness campaigns now that have included men and boys as role models. And such campaigns have the aim at changing the attitudes of men and boys towards gender equality, focusing on mutual respect between women and men. My second point is really, we cannot have a discussion on this topic today without mentioning the Istanbul Convention. And this is, of course, the Council of Europe Convention on preventing and combating violence against women and domestic violence. And it's really the gold standard. Maybe it's a cliche, but it's really the gold standard of what we do in combating this work throughout all of Europe. And we can take somewhat of pride. We got a setback when Turkey withdrew, but after that there's been a mobilization, and more countries has ratified it and joined it. So I think this is really a good trend. And it also, another point with the Istanbul Convention is that our monitoring shows that where countries actually ratify it, it has a real impact. As laws are changed and women are able to live a safer and more secure life. And of course, that's why we discussed today. The Istanbul Convention actually calls for all members of society, especially men and boys, to contribute actively to preventing all forms of violence against women. My third point is that, yes, this is a complex problem in a way. It's important to recognize that domestic violence is an issue at the same time that affects all individuals, and that support and resources should be available for all victims, regardless of their gender. It is also important to address the root causes of domestic violence, such as power imbalances and societal attitudes towards gender, in order to prevent it from occurring in the first place. So every society, in a way, continues to struggle to one degree or another with eliminating violence against women. And recent events also have shown the fragility of what has been achieved. We have also seen that, regrettably. A surge in type of crimes of such kind, both during the lockdowns, you remember, during the COVID-19. And we have also seen as consequence of the horrific war now that continues to rage in Ukraine. And more broadly, in some of our member states, there's been a backlash against the progress that has been made on women's rights and gender equality, fueled by, misinterpretation, misunderstandings, and caused by a broader populist type of fueled movements that have taken root. So, Yes, Petra, you said it. Men and boys are, of course, primarily responsible for it, but in this sense, big part of the problem, but we must also be part of the solution. So, and this is really my fourth point, and I don't think I have time to go through all the elements I have under this point, but just to say that this is something we are working on. We are also developing a new gender equality strategy in the Council of Europe. That would be a very important initiative, I think, which will go for over 5 years, starting next year. And hopefully will be adopted now in November. And there too, the call is to focus on the role of men and boys in ending gender-based violence is also an essential part of this. So that's, maybe I end there. I had a long speech, but I think this is the short version.
Thank you. And before you think, there are all these people from the Nordic countries here, in my fact-finding missions, I specifically went to Spain, because for me it was very important also to show to members of the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe that this is not a Northern European focus and that we can learn from other countries. And I'm very happy, Björn, that you gave some examples also from Andorra, because in Spain they have a feminist policy and they have a Minister for Equality, Irene Montero. And I know there is a lot of controversy around her, the way she puts this forward. And you know, this is what happens when you put a new kind of policy which people find sometimes threatening to their way of life or to the natural order of things. But I think this is what we do when we work on human rights. We want to protect the human rights of everyone. And I think Spain has been showing me, and I think also I have been able to show to people from, you know, countries that maybe have majority Catholic populations, I have to say then, that you can change. And it depends on the political will. Then the last speaker, again from a Nordic country, is my new friend Evan Eriksson, who is the general who has in January been nominated as the General Rapporteur on Violence Against Women. So the floor is yours, Evan. And yes.
Yeah, thank you, Petra, and thank you, Mr. President, Madam Ambassador, and Mr. Deputy Secretary General, my friend Björn from Norway as well. And I also have a long speech, and I will probably repeat a lot of what you guys said, because I totally agree with everything. I've never done this before. As Petra said, I was appointed General Secretary, not General Secretary of the... Not yet. Not too soon, Mr. President, but General Rapporteur on combating violence against women. I'm honored to take on this role, and I look forward to work with all of you to change a course. It's like a big ship that needs to change the course if we don't do anything, and it's not a quick fix to do so. We have to work thorough on long term. And I'm grateful for this opportunity to play a role in the European politics as a politician, but particularly as a man politician, in preventing and combating gender-based violence. I'm glad to be joining forces with all of you, my fellow parliamentarians, who are strongly committing in this fight, therefore also part of the parliamentary network, Women Free from Violence. I also welcome the commitment of the President of our Assembly and the fact that during our part sessions, debates on combating gender-based violence are now a prominent place on the agenda. So thank you, Mr. President, for that. But I'm told that I'm not the first man to take on the role as a General Rapporteur. In fact, long before I joined the Parliamentary Assembly, almost before I was born, I'm not that old, Petra, the Portuguese MP, José Mendes Bota, worked hard to promote the Istanbul Convention from the very inception of its text, and later by meeting with countless civil society representatives, parliamentarians and political leaders